say also that the better team won a best of 3, and if best of 5, then why not best of 7 or best of 11, right? That's really the sort of logic that people like Freak and others used to actually use when you tried to bring up reasonable points as to why you'd want a best of 5 instead. Then you talk about stuff like, so they'd initially defend them with this tenuous reasoning. Then, finally, over time, they'd start to change them. In changing them, they'd sort of mildly acknowledge that there wasn't a good system, but without mentioning the fact that, like, you know, it didn't have to be like that. And then, as you acknowledge that it's not a good system, you act as though you've almost, like, learned something through the process, and now you've discovered something new. You don't necessarily say it like you invented it, but you've discovered something new, a new approach that's going to make more sense, which, by the way, in many cases is the thing that people suggested before, such as all these changes here that exist already, and that existed elsewhere, even in League of Legends, and definitely in esports. And then you bring it forward as though you're pioneering something, and as though like you had to go through this process to get to this point to know why it's good, and now you're introducing it and, like, you know, cue the fanfare, what a great job we've done, right? So I'll give you some examples of statements that were made in the past by Dustin Beck. So here's what it says. This is when they introduced circuit points. It said, circuit points is obviously a big one. We're also trying to reduce the regular amount of regular season games that are played too, as well as extend out what the playoffs look like. If you look at any other sport, playoffs aren't just a week and done. That's actually what we did in the spring split. We literally had the quarterfinals, semi-finals, and finals over 3 days. That's a terrible way to build hype. Hindsight is always 2020. Now, the big problem with that statement there is, first of all, again, another thing I was saying from the beginning of LCS is it's ridiculous to have all of the playoffs over a 3-day span. Well, now they've changed it, obviously, so you have, like, weeks between these things. So people have time to prepare, like they always did in OGN for the quarters to the semis to the finals, etc. Except the last part, hindsight is 2020. So it's a terrible way to build hype. They literally had them all. Yeah, that's what we were saying from day one. Guess what? They defended these things back then and said, and again they said, oh well, if it's just you need more time to practice, why not have 2 weeks? Like, they would always go like ad absurdum with the attempts to like rationalize it. Like if you made a good point, they would just take that to a ridiculous area that wouldn't be practical anyway. Go, well, why not just do that? Why not have best of 500? They're like, brilliant, yeah. Like, what a great argument as to why best of 5 isn't necessarily better than best of 3, right? Kind of a pointless argument. And the part there, hindsight is 2020. Yeah, except that implies that you could only really know these things are better and really see that that wasn't very good before. With hindsight, like by doing it and then going back, or you could just learn from the lessons of the past. You can look elsewhere in the world, look what's better, see the way it plays out. By the way, you don't even need to necessarily actually see it play out. You could just run a simulation and see how it plays out. But you don't need to, because it's already been played out in esports, in League of Legends elsewhere, and in the history of competitive disciplines. You didn't need hindsight, because hindsight already existed. You could look back in other areas, and in this sense you didn't need it in that sense, because it's not like it had never taken place before, which is why you need hindsight. You need hindsight because you have to do things you've never done before, so then you're like, oh, that was a mistake then. But if you could look elsewhere, you wouldn't need hindsight in the same way, would you? So that's the issue. There isn't hindsight needed. OGN had these things before. Other esports games have them. I mean, circuit points existed quite famously in WCS, for example, in StarCraft 2. Now, they didn't do a very good job with it, but the concept already existed long before that. Here's another quote. We learned a lot last year. Cloud9, they got auto-buyed into the quarterfinals. This is for Season 3 Worlds. They played one best of 3, and they're out. That's not a great format. We learned a lot last year. We learned a lot this year. Right, again, not something new. I mean, I was saying that was a terrible format from day one. What was there to learn exactly? I mean, tournaments like GSL, for example, long before Season 3 Worlds, had already switched to best of 5 in the first round of their playoffs, etc. They weren't playing best of 3s. What exactly was it that they had to learn? Why couldn't they learn from others' mistakes? Why couldn't they look elsewhere in their own game and see that in OGN they had best of 5s from the first round of the playoffs on ever since about, I think it was ever since the... It was ever since the winter season of Season 2, so 2012, so before LCS actually began. So technically the league only began at a similar time when it got to the playoffs. No, it was slightly before. So, does Riot actually have to put their hand into some fire, be burned by it, and then go, put your hand in fire, burns? Like, you know what, you shouldn't put your hand in fire. Well, I did tell you not to put your hand in fire. Yeah, but I mean, you know, is not putting your hand in fire, or putting your hand in fire, or just like warming your hand, like which one of these is really like worse or better? Like, can we really say right now? Oh, in hindsight's 2022, not putting your hand in fire actually really hurts and burns and causes damage, so we're not going to do that anymore. Well, yeah, we never had to do that from the beginning though. No, but you know, like it's easy to say that with hindsight, isn't it? Like, you gotta try things out, you know. Believe it or not, we literally used to put our hands in fire and burn them. Like, we've learned that actually doing that causes damage to the hand, so we're not going to do that anymore. We're just going to wear gloves to keep our hands warm. So, I mean, what a ridiculous scenario, right? I mean, the reason why this is irritating to me is because, yes, I've given props every time Riot has improved things, because improving it is good. That is objectively something good, that it is improved. The problem is, when you look at the bigger picture, we could have had LCS like it is now from day one. And we never would have had those scenarios where someone has a really hot streak in the regular season, except for the meta changes, because that's going to make it sound ridiculous, isn't it? And then just totally flunks the playoffs because they're not a very good team. I mean, that has happened in the past, obviously. We wouldn't have had all these issues at Worlds, etc., where Gamma Bears, the team that basically is Flash Wolves now, almost, went to Worlds, and no one ever knew if they were vaguely good whatsoever, because their first round matchup was SK Telecom. They just got banged in the head straight away. So hardly anyone even remembers they went to that Worlds. Cloud9 had the great regular season, and then we just get to see them play Fnatic veterans, and they lose, and they're out already. Like, we never should have had all these issues. We could have had much better LCS, much better OGN. We could have much better Worlds, all the rest of it. I mean, I don't know why I said OGN there. Could have had much better LCK in that sense. Could have had all these aspects improved in these areas from the beginning. It was never necessary. And so you have to ask yourself, what is the mentality that caused this to be the case? Well, it's because